And thank you for recording, Brianna. And Avery is going to help me out with the chat while we go. And we've also saved some time at the end for questions. So we're going to jump right into it. And please jot down any questions as we go. And hopefully we'll have time to get to everybody's answers today. Okay, so today we're talking about the special NOFO from HUD that was just released about a week or two ago. And we're going to start off here with just a quick overview of it. It's geared towards specifically rural and unsheltered homelessness. There is $322 million available nationwide, and Pinellas County is eligible for up to about 4.7 million. And I'll talk more about this later on, but our COC is also eligible for up to 3% of that Pinellas County total, which is a little over $142,000. So it's important to note that this does not impact the annual NOFO. There needs to be a separate application. There will be a whole separate rank and review process. So think of this as completely separate. And any funds awarded here would be in addition to the funds that we already get from the annual NOFO. And although nothing is guaranteed with HUD, these funds would be almost certain to be renewed in future years the same way that our current annual applications are renewed. So what is HUD looking for in this special NOFO? A comprehensive approach to reducing homelessness among those with severe service needs, especially the unsheltered. And partnerships here will be key. So I have more details on this later on, but they're going to look for partnerships with housing authorities, healthcare providers, and even local governments and developers for housing. So they want to see how we're all working together to address the same problem. And funding is available for a variety of different types of projects, PSH, RRH, and joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing, just like the normal NOFO. But also supportive services are eligible this round, and that might include coordinated entry and straight outreach projects, as well as HMIS and COC planning. So who is eligible to apply? The COC collaborative applicant, which is the HLA, and then any projects who go through the COC to be ranked and reviewed. So this is very similar to the annual NOFO. Any nonprofit organization or housing agency or anything like that that has a SAM registration number and a UEI number will be eligible to apply. And so we'll talk more about this towards the end of the presentation. But today we do want to get kind of a sense for who would be interested in applying for the new NOFO, because we already have our annual going. And as you'll see, there is a lot of different steps to this special NOFO. So if we don't have a lot of interest from the community and a lot of new projects that providers kind of have in the back of their minds, then it's not really going to be worth our time to submit our application. We think it's a great opportunity. There's a lot of new funding to be had. But kind of be thinking as you're going if this is something that your agency will be interested in applying for. Okay, so it is a rather lengthy application, so I've divided it into kind of 4 different sections to help us get our minds around it. And the first is the application component number 1. It's the COC application. And so this is the biggest. It has the most different parts. And the first is the plan for serving those with severe service needs. You'll hear me call this just the COC plan or the plan. And I have an entire slide on this in a few minutes to show you all the details of that plan, but it is for sure the biggest part of this whole special NOFO. The COC application will also need to include a letter of support from a lived experience work group that we will have to convene. Also, our rank and review procedures that will be reviewed and scored by HUD. And then also letters of commitment. So again, back to those partnerships, HUD is looking for healthcare resources to be committed, the commitments to new affordable units being built, and then commitments from housing authorities to work with the COC if any new vouchers become available. HUD has said that there is potential for new stability vouchers to come to our COC, but we don't really know any other details on that just yet. They promised more details will be available this summer. So right now we would be looking for housing authorities just to commit to working with the COC on how those would be allocated should they come to us. And then circling back to the COC plan, this is, again, the biggest part of this application. It's worth 70 out of 100 of the available points for the application. So it's very important. And HUD wants to basically know how we plan to serve homeless individuals and families with the most severe service needs. So it can be up to 15 pages long, Times New Roman, single spaced, all that. And it needs to review our current strategies. So what have we already been doing to address those with severe service needs? And then also a discussion of our ideas to continue to improve on those things in the future. So how are we going to leverage the other resources that are out there? Are there any other funds that can be braided that can tie into this to help us improve our service to this group? And again, a focus on equity and reducing unsheltered homelessness. So this plan is definitely the biggest part of the NOFO, and it needs to be completed pretty much, not necessarily before, but it would be best if it was completed before we released our application as well, so that providers, when you apply, you can reference the plan so that we have a cohesive application. So since the timeline on this is kind of tight, and I will go over that later on, we have looked, we are trying to hire a consultant to help us with this part of the COC plan. And so we haven't hired anybody yet, but that is on our minds. So if you know anybody that would be a good fit,
I don't know. The girl told me the clubhouse.
please feel
so
free
I don't know
to
if, like, the clubhouse
ask
is
me
run.
for more details. So the second component of the plan is the project applications. So this is very similar to the annual NOFO. This is where providers submit applications to us. We convene a rank and review committee to review them and decide who should be funded and in what priority order. Again, applications are going to be accepted for things that are accepted in the annual NOFO, like PSH and RRH, but also for supportive services only, prevention, rental assistance. But HUD has made very clear that there will be no funds allocated in this special NOFO for acquisition, rehabilitation, or new construction. And any project needs to serve category 1 or 4 homelessness. So that's your literally and chronically homeless individuals. And something to be aware of when you're kind of brainstorming your potential project applications, the grant term will be across 3 years. And so your budgets need to be for 3 years, but they don't have to be spent down 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. Again, the projects will need to demonstrate alignment with that COC plan. So that's why it's so important that we get the plan out to the public and we have plenty of time to gather feedback from providers. And so they have plenty of time to incorporate elements of that plan in their applications. And as I said, funding will be eligible for renewal in a future NOFO. So dream big when you're thinking about new projects. This is brand new funding that can come to our county and that would continue if we do get it. So think about the projects that you kind of had on the back burner. Application component number 3 is the HLA applications. They're our kind of internal applications. So these are things like coordinated entry, HMIS, and COC planning. So these are grants that our staff is going to write to request funds to help with those 3 objectives. And that is up to about $142,000. Something that is different about this special NOFO compared to the annual NOFO is component 4. So the priority listing, this is where we typically in rank and review deliberations put things into different tiers and score them based on our priority for funding them. Typically when we do that, we recommend to the committee that HLA applications be scored non-competitively because the system wouldn't be able to function without the COC planning and HMIS applications, things like that. So because they're so valuable and everyone uses them, we recommend that they be funded regardless. But HUD is saying that that can't happen this year or with this special NOFO. So our applications will need to be ranked and reviewed just like every other provider's applications. So awards and grant terms, it is a 3-year grant and renewal funding will be available. HUD has said that there will only be 10 awardees in each state, and that's for both the unsheltered and rural set aside. I haven't talked much about the rural set aside at all because obviously we are not a rural community, so we cannot apply for those funds. But there are 6 COCs in the state of Florida that are eligible to apply under the rural part of the special NOFO. And then obviously all the COCs are able to apply for the unsheltered. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of an idea about how competitive this is going to be. And there's, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get into scoring. So HUD scoring, the application total is going to be worth 100 points. And we as a COC have to score at least 50 points to even be considered. Project capacity review and ranking. So our process for, how we convene our rank and review committee and the things that we recommend they score projects based on. HUD will score us on that out of 4 points. Our system performance will be graded out of 18 points. And on that, HUD is basically looking at our system performance data, and they're comparing 2019 to 2021. 2020 is kind of being omitted because obviously COVID had a huge impact on it. So they're looking at things like, our percentage of positive outcomes system-wide. So we have done relatively well on that. We have looked at that data, and I will share with you some of the scoring projections that we have for that. But that is pretty fixed since, our data is our data. The third point here, COC coordination and engagement is worth 8 points. So that's an area that's going to be kind of measured by how many letters of support we can get and how much engagement we have and help in writing that COC plan. So how much the community really gets involved with this application as a whole will be considered there. And then obviously the big one, 70 out of the 100 total points will be for that 15-page narrative. There are some bonus points, and it's important to know about those because it will affect how COCs score. Unfortunately, our COC doesn't qualify for any of the bonus points because it was based on the number of people that are reported as unsheltered in the 2019 PIT. Our number falls just below the cutoff to earn some bonus points. But there are 4 other COCs in Florida that qualify for bonus points. So think about like your bigger areas, Orlando, things like that. They're automatically going to get 10 points added to their application just because of that unsheltered count. So going back to how competitive this is going to be, we are at a disadvantage in this sense because we will not get those extra bonus points. And even outside the state of Florida, some other COCs can get up to 30 bonus points depending on their number of unsheltered. So think about like your largest metro areas, New York or King County, things like that. They're going to be able to get 130 points hypothetically out of 100 points. So we really need to make sure that the application components that we are eligible for are as refined as possible in order to make sure that we can compete with some of those larger jurisdictions. So we did some scoring projections internally. We looked at our system performance data and then kind of took an educated guess, if you will, about what we would score on the narrative and coordination and engagement. And based on that, we think that as a whole, our COC would be likely to score between 67 to 83 out of 100 possible points. So again, it's going to be very competitive. We're not sure what other COCs are going to score, but because that threshold for eligibility is only 50 points, and we think we'll be between 67 and 83, we do think that it's worth applying because it is such a huge amount of new funding for the system. But obviously, there's a lot of factors to consider, especially when you take into account those bonus points. Again, engagement will be key. The points that we can get, we need to get in order to be, to increase our odds for funding. And since 80% of our score is kind of tied to those community engagement factors, like those letters of support and participation in the COC plan, we really kind of need like all hands on deck here in order to make sure we get as many points as possible. All right, and then the timeline here. I mentioned earlier that the timeline is really tight, and it's going to be further made difficult by the fact that we already have our annual NOFO ongoing. So we need to submit the entire application to HUD by October 20th. So if you work backwards from that and give providers a few weeks to submit their applications and rank and review a few weeks to determine the grades for the applications they're reviewing, we really need to have our applications posted for providers by August 19th. That's a little bit more than a month away from now. And as I stated earlier, those applications are going to need to make reference to the COC plan to address those severe service needs. So we basically have from now until mid-August to write that plan, convene the stakeholder groups, and get that feedback in the plan before we can even open the applications. So it's a heavy lift. It's a really competitive special NOFO. It is a significant amount of funding for our community. So something that we're going to need to kind of discuss is, who is likely to apply? Like, is it worth it for the COC to kind of hire a consultant, do all this work internally in order to submit a full application? It wouldn't be unless we have a decent amount of provider interest. So I know that was a lot. Sorry if I went kind of fast. But I do want to open it up for questions, comments, and discussion. So just kind of jump in or raise a hand. Let me know if you want to talk about anything on a previous slide or if you want to ask a question. Arrow, go ahead.
Hello. I know this kind of came up, I think, the other day talking about Safe Harbor, and we've got that funding group now for recommendations and everything, but it seems like a lot of what we're looking to do with Safe Harbor might be almost like a model focus point for this funding. It's our largest individual homeless shelter. We're already talking with the county about incorporating, and the health department, and incorporating other medical services at the site. We've got a high chronic population. We're trying to improve the facility so that our street homeless will actually go there and get services. A lot of them are declining to even go there right now, and that is where our capacity is available. So I don't know, I just wanted to throw that out as a potential focal point maybe for the funding.
Arrow, I think you have a good point. Internally when staff talked about this and the tight turnaround, we're hoping, because the focus is on severe service needs, that all of our conversations around street outreach, Safe Harbor, the work on trying to infuse healthcare into everything that we do, that this is a public health crisis and not a public safety crisis, kind of converges in this work for this special NOFO. So we're still going to need all the community convening and the decisions around what our service plan will be. And certainly that's going to need to involve mental health providers, our hospitals, and substance abuse providers as well. But I think you're right. Some of that work has already started.
Any other questions or comments about, who's eligible to apply, or application components?
I actually had a question earlier because you used a lot of initials, and most of them jumped out at me of like, oh, I know what that is. But under supported services, I saw that street outreach was there. What was the CE again?
That stands for coordinated entry.
Oh, it's
There are, you know, and Amy, feel free to jump in here. There are a ton of eligible expenses under the supportive services only category. I'm really honestly not sure what they all are. But I think that it could cover everything, like, you know, obviously street outreach, but then even projects like Showered and Empowered, things like that, where it really is just a single service being provided to a client here and there rather than a housing program.
Yeah, so the other types of things that you would be familiar with that could fall under supportive services are things like workforce development, or you know, even though we're able to refer folks to ELC, we and for anybody not familiar with our acronyms, ELC's Early Learning Coalition, you know, there's that kind of double-edged sword that they have around ELC, where you have to be working in order to get the benefit, but you need somebody who can watch your kids so that you can go find a job. So childcare services are a supportive service that's allowed under that street outreach. Like Kaylee mentioned, Showered and Empowered, which is a hygiene type program. Those are the types of things you'd see there. Coordinated entry is something they're asking COCs to consider applying for more money for in that planning pot. And the types of things I would be thinking about there as a COC would be things like, you know, we know that we don't have enough folks working to get chronicity packets ready, for example, to move people from street outreach into permanent supportive housing. Maybe that's a way that we could supplement coordinated entry. HMIS is working really hard to get more people to enter into HMIS, but sometimes it's a staffing issue. As many of our providers know and have said in meetings to us, is that, you know, this is an unfunded mandate that takes a lot of staff work. So could we consider having a centralized data entry person at the COC level for very small programs to get more diverse providers to enter in HMIS? So those are some of the types of things that you might see come under the COC planning area. Again, depending on what the COC decides for priorities.
Thank you, Amy.
Do we need to put a focus on Built for Zero? I mean, is this a good footing too to get off the ground, like that real individualized approach with rehousing?
Yeah, I would assume. I'm not that involved with Built for Zero, so I would defer to Avery or Amy on that one. But I think it would definitely relate.
Yes, April, the work that we've done thus far and the work that we're continuing to do with Built for Zero could inform this plan.
I think the hard part, Arrow, that we have to remember, right, is our COC has dictated that the COC cannot do the types of things that this allows, right? So we know we need more PSH. We are never going to go build that PSH. We're not going to apply to build it. And so that's kind of the catch-22 we're in with this NOFO, is that we're trying to ensure, if we're going to do this lift, is somebody going to apply for the allowable types of projects that are allowed under this? So there's joint TH, PSH, there's joint TH-RH. We're not going to hold you to it, but we're just, we've been dictated to that as a COC, we're not to do those types of projects. So we need to make sure somebody on this call is interested in submitting applications to that NOFO.
Well, the Directions for Living is interested in submitting application for the NOFO for dispatchable street outreach. Could be for, you know, the temporary emergency shelter that we so desperately need, case management for families.
Well, the overlay of
And
case management in partnership with
overlay
street outreach
for
to make sure
60
the connections are made. Yeah.
62 plus individuals is our focus.
That's helpful. Thanks, Wendy. Kaylee, do you maybe want to go back to the allowable slide?
Sure.
It may not be what you titled it, but that may help everybody think about. The other reminder I just want to make note of is this is not allowable for any renewals. It has to be a completely new project and new service. And then these are the types of things that are allowed.
So that's interesting that it's PSH and things like that, but it cannot be any like acquisition or rehab of units. Like it has to just be pretty much vouchers, it looks like, right? Or some sort of rent assistance with it.
Yeah.
So with any of those, would it allow for kind of that landlord liaison position too, then to have someone that's like full-time going out and gathering? I know, I think it was Manatee County recently just created this like landlord consortium type thing. And I think they're providing certain incentives for participation in the consortium, but I wonder if maybe something like that would be needed in order to have that support of the units.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be important. I know the HLA's landlord liaison, I think is funded for the next 3 years through a new United Way grant. So we're for sure keeping him on. Obviously, that's very important work that we can discuss in the plan. But you know, I think if we could add a second position, I mean, it kind of just depends on what we decide to write as a community in the plan, and we kind of just got to stick to that. So I know I've heard there could be another position within the HLA for coordinated entry that would be helpful to a lot of people. So, you know, really we need to just kind of decide what our priorities would be as a group and then write the plan based around that. And then, you know, obviously individual project applications could tie back into the things that are in the plan. Yes, I can send out the PowerPoint, and we are also recording it in case anybody joined late or missed.
And Jerry, thanks for that. The housing authorities will have to participate in the planning meetings in order for us to write that severe service need plan. So they'll definitely be a part of the discussion moving forward.
Okay, well, I know that this was a lot of new information, and we didn't mean to throw everybody on the spot here to tell us what kind of projects you're going to be interested in. But as you saw, the timeline is really tight. So if there is interest throughout the community, we need to know that so we know if we're moving forward here. And again, we need to think about hiring that consultant. We have some more information about that on our website if you know anybody that would be a good fit to help us with that. Amy, anything else to add?
No, I think that is it. We will, many of you have already let us know who will be participating for your agencies and the planning process. So our timeline, just to be clear, is by Friday. Applications are due from consultants. So we will probably go ahead and spend some time this week getting some times on your calendar for the coming weeks. That could change based on the consultant schedule, but we recognize there's a tight turnaround, and so we want to be able to get some time on folks' calendars. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And I will send out those slides now.
Thanks, Kaylee.
Thank you.
Yep. Have a good rest of your day.
You.